All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And for the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been going over a series of video presentations, creating them based on the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. I'm under the Structuring the Web with HTML, and I'm looking at the Multimedia and Embedding section, and we're up to adding vector graphics to the web. Now, vector graphics, the big thing about this, as it says, is twofold. All right. Number one is they're smaller in size, but maybe even more importantly, they're highly scalable. So as you make them bigger or smaller, they don't lose their focusedness or whatever you want to call it. As it says, they don't pixelate. Now, I had shown you an example of pixelation. You may or may not remember this. But with this favicon that we had this. And as I made it bigger, you can see how it's pixelating. All right. And as you make it smaller, it looks a little bit more decent, whatever you'd want to call it. All right. But that's an example of what they're talking about with something pixelating. Okay. So just what are vector graphics? Well, as mentioned here, on the web, you work with two types of images, raster images and vector images. Raster images, as mentioned there, are defined as a grid of pixels. All right. They're bitmaps or .bmps, they're pings or .pngs, JPEGs, which are either .jpg or .jpegs, and GIFs. Vector images, as mentioned, they're defined using algorithms. They allow you to create the SVG format, as mentioned there, allows you to create powerful vector graphics for use on the web. It says to give you an idea of the difference between the two, let's look at the example. You can find this example out on their GitHub repo if you take a look. It shows two seemingly identical images side by side. A red star with a black shadow. The first one is a ping, the second one is an SVG image. So when you look at these, right, maybe you can tell, maybe you can't tell, but this one, which I believe is the raster, and notice they look pretty much the same here, but you start to see the pixelation here, all right, as you make them bigger and bigger. But here, the image in the vector format still retains its focusability or whatever you want to call it. It's not pixelated. It still looks very good. All right, so the left one was a ping and the right one was an SVG. As it says again, the image becomes apparent when you zoom in, and that's what I just showed you. Now, in this example, as I make them bigger, you may or may not notice, but they may not totally pixelate. This example, I went out to their actual example to take a look. All right, these are pictures of examples. All right, well, let me get rid of that. Sorry about that. Where are we? We're right here. So, as mentioned here, what is SVG? Notice it's an XML or extensible markup language based language for describing vector images. Now, the difference is HTML is a set of predefined tags, but when you work with XML, you can actually create your own tags. All right, depending on the type of XML you're using, they may have a complete list of tags, but you can typically also make up your own. As it says, at the simplest end of the spectrum, you have elements for very simple shapes, circles, rectangles, etc. All right, so here's an example. As it says, this code creates a circle and a rectangle. There's the circle, there's a rectangle, and again, as you make them bigger, they really aren't going to pixelate. It says, from the example above, you may get the impression that SVG is easy to hard code or hand code. It says, yes, you can do it in an SVG in a text editor, but this can get very complex when you start creating more complex images. All right. So other advantages of using SVG include the text remains accessible. They lend themselves well to styling and scripting. All right. So those are the two biggest advantages. What about disadvantages? SVG can get complicated quickly. So the more complex you want to make your drawing, the more you might have to work with the SVG to, with hand coding it. It's not supported in older browsers. Well, a lot of things are not supported in older browsers. So adding SVG, again, scalar vector graphics to your pages. The quick way, as it says, to embed via an image tag, you just need to reference it. So what's the difference? The difference is right there. The advantage, again, quick, familiar syntax. All right, you can make the image into a hyperlink, and it can be cached by the browser. Cons, you can't manipulate the image using JavaScript. If you want to control the SVG content with CSS, you must include inline CSS, and you can't restyle it with the pseudo classes. For older browsers, you could reference a PNG or JPEG from your source and use the source set attribute to reference SVG. I have never gotten into doing anything in that amount of detail. How to include SVG code inside of your HTML? As it says, you can also open up the SVG file in a text editor, copy the SVG code, and paste it right into your HTML document, also known as SVG inline or inlining SVG. Again, as with all this stuff, there are pros and cons to doing it. Pros, all right, it can reduce loading time. You can assign classes and IDs to this. It's the only approach that allows you to use CSS interactions. And you can make the markup into a hyperlink. The cons, the method is only suitable if you're using SVG in one place. It increases file size. The browser cannot cache inline SVG. And you may include fallback, but browsers that support SVG still download any fallback images. All right, so then next they show how to embed this with an iframe. And again, the whole idea behind this is just another way. So again, if you want something that's on a website that will not only scale, but will look great in any kind of resolution, SVG may be the way to go. And that's really what they're getting to. Okay, that's pretty much it. Now that was not long. Again, part of the nice thing about these is when you look right here, you'll notice there's an SVG tutorial, some quick tips, and some other stuff. I'm not going to read these to you. All right, but typically the tutorials that are on the the Mozilla Developer Network are the best place to start. So we have now gone through images in HTML, video and audio content from object to iframe, and adding vector graphics. So what's next is responsive images. All right. And responsive images are basically images that work well on devices of any size. So they scale appropriately. So we'll come back and we will talk about those in just a couple moments.